We anticipate in the next 10 to 12 years, approximately 8 to 6 million Hispanics coming into the United States and 41 million Asians. You have been the majority minority for 400 years in this country. You have been the number 2 population for 400 years. You're going to get kicked out of being number 2. You're going to go down and become number 4. Now, common sense, even a third grade education would tell you, if you didn't get anything when you were number 2, you all jumped ahead of me, but anyway, you can guess what you're going to get when you become number 4.
President Biden, do you support reparations?
Well, I mean, since I haven't spoken on this, got a chance. Number one, the reason we're the country we are is because of immigration. We've been able to cherry pick the best from every single continent. The people who come here have determination, resilience. They are ready to stand up and work like the devil. We have 24 out of 100 children in our school today is Hispanic. The idea that we are going to walk away and not provide every opportunity for them is that not only stupid and immoral, but it's bad for America. They are the future of America. Systemic racism that has plagued our nation for far, far too long. I said that over the course, blinders have been taken off the nation, the American people. But what many Americans didn't see or had simply refused to see couldn't be ignored any longer. Those 8 minutes and 46 seconds that took George Floyd's life opened the eyes of millions of Americans and millions of people around all over the world. It was the knee on the neck of justice, and it wouldn't be forgotten. And it's not white Americans' fault, but just a fact.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today, many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. Now, this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington, in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
We are owed $104 billion on the very low end, plus $735 billion recurring. This number does not include the cost of about 50 Black Wall Streets that were decimated, nor compound interest from 2017 when Sean D. Rochester's book, The Black Tax, was published, nor the cost of Black life, nor the cost of living increases, nor the war on drugs, nor the current day pandemic. The number I'm working with is for slavery, Jim Crow, and accrued ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantage in the country our ancestors built with their lives. Good evening on the West Coast. Good evening in the Central. Good evening in the Mountain. Good evening on the East Coast. You know exactly who it is, family. Angela Nirvana, your hostess with the mostest on the Reparationist Perspective, bringing you those ADOCS hot topics and making the case for reparations, making the case for weaponizing our vote and socializing our suffering. And I thank you one and all. Thank you, Tony, in the clubhouse. I see you, fam. What's up, Amos Jones? Perfect Ochiko, Diaper Buddy, Joel Jones. I see you, Brian Johnson. Thank you, one and all. Thank you for joining the live. And for those of you who have yet to chat who you are, I welcome you. And I thank you for setting aside some time out of your busy evening to join me in what is a new series entitled Ida B. Wells 2.0, Anti-Black Racism. Yes, I'm not trying to trauma bond with y'all or nothing like that, but I am over this government and the mainstream media trying to act as if anti-Black racism has ended because they gave us Obama, because they gave us Kamala. No, we are at George Floyd, 9 minutes and 29 seconds to the neck. And so this channel, it took a lot of prayer, and I had to meditate over whether or not I was going to do this series. But the series needs to be done because the mainstream media is acting as if the police just all of a sudden stopped being wretched and vile. And yes, while we do have to address Black on Black crimes and murder, we do understand how we got that in our communities. This is not exempt to Black folks. Whenever you rob any group of resources, until you make them white or they can afford to be white, people tend to rob and kill and steal from those they live amongst. So that is an issue, but is it an issue from institutional systemic racism? We didn't just up and one day decided to rob and kill each other. When I was growing up in Dayton, Ohio, okay, our families had factory jobs, they had great government jobs, they had homes. And now you got 8 Democrats voting against $15 an hour when the median home price nationwide is $340,000. And so this is by design to make American descendants of chattel slavery the anchor of white capitalism. When our ancestors built all the wealth, all of it, there was no other industry but chattel slavery that was the seed to the return on the investment in the hundreds of trillions that white folks and immigrants now benefit from, while we as a collective are the anchor, have no wealth to leave our children. So this is my square, and it is my mission to keep anti-Black racism in the new Black media at the forefront of the issues. Because let me help you with something. White supremacy, you will never break the backbone of it until you stop anti-Black racism. Y'all can't just skip over anti-Black racism for over 400 years in the country since we were dragged here in chains and decide to weaponize George Floyd to protect the Asians over COVID. No, that's not how any of that is going to work on the reparationist perspective. Clubhouse, if you want to see me live, join me on YouTube under the reparationist perspective. Speaking of which, let me fly my banner. I've got some people to thank for some very generous donations to help me educate the masses. Yes, they help me to educate the masses and do my advocacy work. We're doing big things. As a result of my involvement with Coalition for a Just and Equitable California, formerly the ADOCS California, we've been able to bring AB 3121 to bear. So we're also offering candidates to sit on the commission, to be selected on the commission to study reparations for Californians. They have 10 million in Evanston, Illinois, and although I don't agree with them deciding what we should use that cash repair for, it is a byproduct of our efforts as the formerly ADOS movement, ADOS Chicago, is there working on a violence bill that is now law. So ADOCS specifically are going to be repaired for the violence that they're enduring in Chicago by design of institutional systemic racism. They've gotten rid of 200,000 Black teachers nationwide. Chicago's been hardest hit. And so ADOS Chicago, shout out to them for getting that measure passed into law. And so now there's going to be relief for the families who are suffering under the boot of that oppression. The Catholic Church has decided to do a down payment of $100 million for slavery reparations. And we're getting people elected into office. Full-chested reparationists are people that at least know our agenda for cash repair. So we're moving and shaking. And so that's what your donations enable me to do. It helps to offset the expenses of bringing you this show. The time I pour into every segment, I've got about 8 series in me that are, I got about 4 of them have been produced, but trying to create more time to do this full time. We need full-time people like me with big mouths who are going to sound the alarm about all the puckery going on. Otherwise, we would never have made the strides on reparations that we have since Kamala Harris threw her hat in the ring for the president. That's been me with my movement. The reparationist movement have been moving, and we ain't stopped, and we're not slowing down. So let me get to my notes so I can thank you properly for your generous donations. Let's see here. Thank you, Nicole Chrisman. I want to thank Zorro Roberts. You went above and beyond, Mr. Zorro Roberts. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Mary Beth Massey, you did your thing too. I want to thank you so much for your generous donation. Okay, so those are like my top 3 donors. I want to thank everyone who has contributed to this show. I am humbled by your love for the content and your love for me. Doing this work on behalf of American descendants of chattel slavery, it means the world to me and our people collectively. Thank you, ADOCS and allies alike. So let's jump right into it because I've got to jump in 45 minutes to do my other segment, Dear Immigrants, because of ADOCS. And then we'll do an after party in the clubhouse. For those of you who want to lime away on either topic, we're going to be chopping it up. Thank you to the clubhouse. Oh my God, the East Coast stayed online with me until around 1 in the morning their time, chopping it up about the segments on yesterday. I thank you guys for your questions, for your comments to the clubhouse. You can find me over there under the show title after the second one. I'm over there now just to let people know to come over here on the live. But the second show is titled over there, Dear Immigrants, because of ADOCS. C is for channel. Okay. So let's jump right into it, family. It's really a happy day for me and us as a collective, as a people, to have been under the boot of the white oppressive police force since the overseer and the slave patrol. Friday's testimony, although a half day, I just want to highlight the man of the hour, Lieutenant Zimmerman. Oh my God, family. So let's jump into it. I want to deal with, what he did for us. I want to talk to you about his testimony, talk to you about him, and talk to you about the letter they wrote condemning the Minneapolis police officers wrote an open letter condemning Chauvin for taking the life. Let's just start there. Let's just start. It's rich. Look at God. It is rich. Okay, this article is entitled, and of course, I'll be making my comments in between. You know how I do. Minneapolis police officers pen open letter condemning former officer Derek Chauvin. Now, I learned about this letter through the course of my research on Lieutenant Zimmerman and his searing testimony. I mean, you could have just passed the plate. Just when I thought you could have passed the plate on Donald Williams, Genevieve Hansen. Oh, the young lady, the 17-year-old Darnisha. I can't recall her name. I mean, every time I think, let's just go to deliberation, I get a whole nother testimony that says, this is the one. This is the one. This is the one. The prosecution is doing an incredible job. Okay, so I learned about this letter after learning about Zimmerman and how he volunteered to come and do this testimony. But let's talk about the letter first. This is June 13 is the article, okay? Members of the Minneapolis Police Department spoke out on Friday against former police officer Derek Chauvin in an open letter addressed to everyone, but especially the Minneapolis citizens. Derek Chauvin failed us as a human and stripped George Floyd of his dignity and life. This is not who we are, said the letter signed by 14 MPD officers. We're not the union or the administration, the letter says. We stand ready to listen and embrace the calls for change, reform, and rebuilding, says the letter, which comes as powerful police unions across the country are digging in, preparing for a once-in-a-generation showdown over policing, and new polls that indicate that most Americans now acknowledge that African American descendant of chattel slavery, me speaking, are more likely to be mistreated or even killed by the police. Now, this is rich, but this was then. Since the trial, that's dwindled down from around 70% to around 35%. They want to see that race soldier be found not guilty. Well, let me not say that they don't want him found not guilty, but apparently the defense is doing, the Jedi mind trick on these morons and Neanderthals that actually believe that he was doing his job. And I've already shared with you guys yesterday about Cahill not allowing of 18 complaints in Chauvin's 19 years. There have been 8 incidences that are similar to what he did to Floyd to finally take his life. You've got to understand, family. He was practicing in these 8 different complaints. He was practicing. And each and every time it would go to court, he would get defense. Nelson, I do believe, to get him off. He continued to work, family, with 18 complaints, 8 of which mirror him in some way, shape, or form, trying to take the life of the victims, the ones that were being pursued by way of asphyxiation. And Cahill is only allowing the weakest 2 of the 8 for the prosecution to use before the jury. 2 of the weakest of those 8. I read them on yesterday's show. You have to go back because I don't have a lot of time to do all that again. So look at yesterday's show to hear the 8 that I'm talking about. And yet, he is allowing defense to use a March 2019 arrest of Floyd, who was accosted by the police and ingested and swallowed the drugs so he wouldn't have to go to jail, to try to make a parallel between his drug abuse and his erratic behavior. Cahill is allowing the defense to use that incident. So in my opinion, you're helping defense. The jury needs to hear about these 8 incidents, and he's only allowing the weakest 2. Woo-wee, they busy, family. We got to stay prayed up. Y'all better be, your inner Christ need to talk to their inner Christ. The judge is in Christ because, see, what that's going to impact once we manage to get a guilty verdict is my prayer on all three accounts. That's going to set him up for light sentencing, to have a judge who would not allow similar incidents of him trying to get that neck on 8 other occasions until he finally succeeded with Chauvin, with the blood choke. Chauvin finally succeeded on Floyd with the blood choke, excuse me. Know what we're up against, family. The system is on trial. America is on trial with 3 Ks. Chauvin is on trial. And defense is trying to pin it on the drug use, his underlying health conditions, the crowd, the bystanders. He trying to blame it on the rain. He trying to blame it on the dog ate my homework. He trying to blame it on, pick anything to not hold this man accountable for what we all saw on the video several times over. Him purposely and intentionally taking the life of George Floyd. But I digress. Back to the article. There were, quote, there were more willing to sign, but the group opted to showcase people from across the PD, as well as male, female, black, white, straight, gay, leader, frontline, etc. Internally, this is sending a message, said Paul Omot, a spokesperson for the officers who penned the open letter. Most of the officers hold ranks of lieutenant or sergeant, according to Omot. Derek Chauvin, who pressed his knee on Floyd's neck for it was not nearly 9 minutes. We've come to find out it's 9 minutes, 29 seconds, was charged with second-degree murder, and 3 other officers on the scene, Thomas Lane Tutau and J. Alexander Kawang, have been charged with aiding and abetting second-degree murder. Chauvin's bail was set at $1.25 million. Okay, let me read the letter. Hold on. Dear everyone, but especially Minneapolis citizens, an open letter to express what the vast majority of Minneapolis police officers feel at this moment. We wholeheartedly condemn Derek Chauvin. We are with you in the denouncement of Derek Chauvin's actions on Memorial Day 2020. Like us, Derek Chauvin took an oath to hold the sanctity of life most precious. Derek Chauvin failed as a human being and stripped George Floyd of his dignity and his life. This is not who we are. We are with you and want to communicate a sentiment that is broad within our ranks. We ask that our people, that our voices be heard. We are leaders, formal and informal, and from all ranks within the Minneapolis Police Department. We're not the union or the administration. We are officers who represent the voices of hundreds of other Minneapolis police officers, hundreds. We acknowledge that Chief Arredondo needs each of us to dutifully follow him while he shows us the way. We stand ready to listen and embrace the calls for change, reform, and rebuilding. We are with you moving forward. We want to work with you and for you to regain, and we want to work with you and for you to regain your trust. Okay, so this Richard Zimmerman took the stand. Okay, let's talk about that. Friday's proceedings in the trial of Derek Chauvin ended with critical testimony from the longest-serving officer in the Minneapolis Police Department, who testified that Mr. Chauvin's actions were what? Totally unnecessary. Police testimony against Mr. Chauvin, the former officer charged with killing George Floyd, could be crucial to the prosecution's case as they move into next week. I don't see how they're going to drag this out for a month. This is over as far as I'm concerned. This man's testimony in Chauvin. Friday's proceedings ended early because the trial is ahead of schedule. The judge said, here are the highlights. Lieutenant Richard Zimmerman, who leads the department's homicide unit, said Mr. Chauvin's actions violated police policy, quote,
Pulling him down to the ground face down and putting your knee on the neck for that amount of time is just uncalled for, said Lieutenant Zimmerman, who joined the department in 1985. He was one of a group of 14 veteran police officers who published that public letter I just read to you last June, condemning the actions of Mr. Chauvin. The officer said the letter was representative of the opinion of hundreds of police officers. This is not who we are, already did that. The first witness of the day, Sergeant John Edwards, was sent to the Cup Foods convenience store after the arrest to secure the crime scene. Mr. Edwards said he followed protocol by telling officers who were still on the scene to turn on their body cameras and identify the areas where they interacted with Mr. Floyd. He also asked them to try and find witnesses, though most people had already left. Sergeant Edwards did find at least one witness. You already know him. He took the stand, Mr. Charles McMillan, who gave an emotional testimony earlier this week. At the scene that night, Mr. McMillan asked Sergeant Edwards if he was under arrest. When Sergeant Edwards said that he wasn't, Mr. McMillan said he wanted to leave. Additional testimony from police officers will be an important tool for prosecutors who are seeking to show that Mr. Chauvin violated use of force policies and that his actions were unnecessary and unlawful. Me speaking, why wasn't he fired long ago? How in the world do these race soldiers get away with this until they murder one of us? I remind you, 18 complaints in 19 years, 8 of which mirrored what he did to George Floyd until he finally took his life. And this is why I think he was so emboldened. Once I learned he's done this 8 other times and has gotten off, his white privilege just kicked into high gear. He literally thought he was going to get away with murder with all the cameras rolling. How smug. It's unfreaking believable. But I guess he thought if I got away with it 8 times, surely Mr. Nelson will get me off this time again. Let's all pray that he is wrong. All it takes is one to say not guilty. Just like in the Walter Scott case, the horror, we got to get to praying, family. That's the only way we get things done is through the Christ in each and every one of us, appealing to the Christ in every juror and every Christ in this judge, okay? The Christ in the judge. We that's the only place we can go. That's where I live right now, in prayer. Mr. Nelson asked the lieutenant whether people can become combative after waking up from being unconscious. Lieutenant Zimmerman, I'm sorry. Let me go back. Additional testimony, will be an important tool for prosecutors who are seeking to show that Mr. Chauvin violated use of force policies and that his actions were unnecessary and unlawful. Eric J. Nelson, Mr. Chauvin's defense attorney, used his cross-examination of Lieutenant Zimmerman to temper those ideas. Mr. Nelson asked the lieutenant whether people can become combative after waking up from being unconscious. Lieutenant Zimmerman also said police officers are trained to kneel on people's shoulders in some circumstances when they handcuff a person. Throughout the trial, Mr. Nelson has suggested that Mr. Chauvin's knee was on Floyd's back or shoulder, not on his neck. It's just, I gotta laugh to keep from screaming, okay? He is literally trying to do a Jedi mind trick on the jurors to suggest that Chauvin's knee was on his back or shoulder, not the neck. We can see him digging in as the crowd grew more and more enraged. He would dig in deeper. He was so smug and so comfortable, like Genevieve Hansen said. But I don't want to, trauma bond with you over that. I try to keep the videos and all that stuff off this show. Just the highlights, just the facts, right? Okay, so let's go next to, got that one done. Okay, let's see here. What is this one? Okay, totally unnecessary. The longest serving Minneapolis police officer says Chauvin violated police policy. Okay, I'm going to jump to see what I haven't read of this. Oh, here's a couple more little paras that I want to get in. I just went straight to this article. Okay. So we already know it was totally unnecessary per Lieutenant Zimmerman. His testimony came on the 5th day of the trial of Mr. Chauvin, the former police officer, who also criticized his actions. That Supervisor Sergeant David Pleger said on Thursday that Mr. Chauvin should have stopped holding Mr. Floyd down once he became unresponsive, and that Mr. Chauvin had not initially divulged that he knelt on Mr. Floyd. Prosecutors have sought to show that Mr. Chauvin's actions were unusually violent and that he failed to follow the department's policies on force. Lieutenant Zimmerman testified that the officers are taught to move handcuffed people out of the prone positions as quickly as possible by turning them on their side or sitting them up, and that officers had never been trained to kneel on people's necks while they were handcuffed and lying on their stomachs. Pass the plate. You need to get them off their chest, he said. If you're lying on your chest, that's constricting your breathing even more. Eric Nelson used his cross-exam. We saw that part. Okay, we saw that part. Lieutenant Zimmerman said on Friday that police officers had a duty to take care of a person that they had handcuffed. His safety is your responsibility, Lieutenant Zimmerman said. His well-being is your responsibility. Lieutenant Zimmerman acknowledged that people who are handcuffed can still be combative and try to hurt officers, such as by kicking them, but he said that they usually only present a minor threat. Once a person is cuffed, the threat level goes all the way down, he said. They're cuffed. How can they really hurt you? Lieutenant Zimmerman was did that part. Friday was not the first time that Lieutenant Zimmerman had testified in a high-profile case involving police. In 2019, he testified that the scene of a fatal shooting by a Minneapolis police officer was well lit, contradicting an argument from the officer's lawyers that the lighting in the area was poor. Rich, and more rich. Let's see what else I've got over here on the subject. Welcome one and all to the live. Thank you for joining. I'll get to your comments momentarily. 6:33, we're making good time. Okay. Let's go to the FBI. So this is what's problematic, family. Because we may get a conviction, but we will never get justice until we get an executive order to deem the KKK a domestic terrorist group and all those little skinheads and all that kind of jazz, right? We need all of that to be considered domestic terrorism. Qualified immunity has got to be decimated. Okay? Private prisons, the decimation of private prisons, as long as the states and the investors can turn a profit, we're going to continue to be re-enslaved within the private prison industrial complex. So you're not serious about real police reform until that too is dismantled. I know Biden hit up a couple of the federal prisons, but that's not the kind of crimes we're doing. The nonviolent offenders are peddling weed and getting locked up for that while the state turns a profit now. Okay? And you also have to give us our anti-lynch law. Instead of using George Floyd to give protections to Asians. And I want to share with you this article from the FBI. This is back in 2016 when the FBI warned of white supremacists in law enforcement 10 years ago. So in 2006, the FBI said white supremacy is all throughout the country in these police forces. So this is what I have a problem with. You let Chauvin get away for 19 years, 18 complaints, 8 of which mirror what ultimately took George Floyd's life. So we may get a conviction in a little time, but will never get justice until the system goes down. Let's read, get into it. Increased attention toward the killing of Black men and women by police throughout the past year has ignited national conversations on racism in law enforcement. From Freddie Gray in April 2015 to Deborah Danner, an emotionally disturbed woman fatally shot this week by an NYPD officer. Now, this article is June 2016. Keep that in mind. Protests around the country have forced many Americans to reassess how police engage with communities of color. Hi, Tara Love. You can catch me live over in YouTube if you choose, honey bun. Otherwise, I'll see you in the after party after my Dear Immigrants Because of ADOCS session coming up at 7 o'clock. In light of, or perhaps despite the increased scrutiny, FBI Director James Comey told police officers at a national conference last Sunday that because of insufficient data on use of force, Americans actually have no idea whether racial bias in policing is really an epidemic. Pointing to current public outrage over police killings of African Americans, Comey said the absence of good information and data has aided in the growing belief that police officers target particular communities. Yeah, it took all the way to 2020 George Floyd for them to get serious about the discussion. They know what time it is. They've always known who they put in charge. That is the narrative, he told attendees of the International Association of Chief of Police. It is a narrative driven by video images of real misconduct, possible misconduct, and perceived misconduct. But even if there aren't hard statistics, the problem of racial bias among police is not new, to my point. In fact, it's been a concern of the FBI for at least a decade. Exactly 10 years ago this week, the FBI warned of the potential consequences, including bias, of white supremacist groups infiltrating local and state law enforcement, indicating it was a significant threat to national security. In the 2006 bulletin, the FBI detailed the threat of white nationalists and skinheads infiltrating police in order to disrupt investigations against fellow members and recruit other supremacists, which Chauvin is. He's more than likely the KKK. The bulletin was released during a period of scandal for many law enforcement agencies throughout the country, including a neo-Nazi gang formed by members of the LA County Sheriff's Department. You know, the ones that got away with beating Rodney King to a pulp on tape? They got off. Who harassed Black and Latino communities. Similar investigations revealed officers and entire agencies with hate group ties in Illinois, Ohio, and Texas. Much of the bulletin has been redacted, but in it, the FBI identified white supremacists in law enforcement as a concern because of their access to both restricted areas vulnerable to sabotage and elected officials or people who could be seen as potential targets for violence. The memo also warned of ghost skins, hate group members who don't overtly display their beliefs in order to blend into society and covertly advance white supremacist causes. At least one white supremacist group has reportedly encouraged ghost skins to seek positions in law enforcement for the capability of alerting skinhead crews of pending investigative action against them, the report read. Problems with white supremacists in law enforcement have surfaced since the report. In 2014, 2 Florida officers, including a deputy police chief, were fired after an FBI informant outed them as members of the KKK. It marked the second time within 5 years that the agency uncovered an officer's membership in the KKK. Several agencies nationwide have also launched investigations into personnel who may not be formal hate group members, but face allegations of race-based misconduct. Social media has made it easier to expose white supremacists who serve in law enforcement. In September 2015, a North Carolina police officer was fired after a picture of him giving a Nazi salute surfaced on Facebook. And as recently as August, the Philadelphia Police Department launched an internal investigation after attendees of Black Lives Matter rally outside the Democratic National Convention spotted an officer in charge of crowd control with a tattoo of the Nazi Party emblem on his forearm and posted the image on Instagram. Many people in these communities of color feel they have been the subject of police violence for decades, said Samuel Jones, professor of law at the John Marshall School of Law in Chicago. And when an officer engages in conduct that adds or enhances that divide, they're ultimately jeopardizing the integrity of their agencies and putting their fellow officers in danger. Policing in America has historically had racial implications. The earliest forms of organized law enforcement in the U.S. can be traced to slave patrols that tracked down escaped slaves and overseers assigned to guard settler communities from Native Americans. In the century since, many law enforcement agencies directly participated in antagonizing communities of color or provided a shield for others who did. But in the 10 years since the FBI's initial warning, little has changed, Jones said. Neither the FBI nor state and local law enforcement agencies have established systems for vetting personnel for potential supremacist links, he said. That task is left primarily to everyday citizens and nonprofit organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center, one of few that tracks the growing number of hate groups in America. We catch them when we can, which means when we notice someone and check in the database, said Heidi Barich, director of the Intelligence Project at the Southern Poverty Law Center. But if this was white folks being executed by government sanction, would we be so casual about catching, the other groups that execute white folks when we can? Would it be so casual and cavalier that this is still going on to this day? So I guess they'll catch you when they can, while really not giving too much attention to it. They're directly hiring these people and putting them out in our communities. The group is responsible for exposing an Alabama officer as a member of a white nationalist hate group, League of the South, after he spoke at their national conference in 2013. The officer was later fired. Obviously, we do not want people with white supremacist or other extremist views to be in such positions, so it is important to screen them out, she added. The First Amendment's freedoms of association and expression mean it's perfectly legal for anyone to join a hate group, as long as it's for the purposes of legal activity, and still be a member of law enforcement. Did you hear me? They deem us as black terrorist groups. They form COINTELPRO, but give these white devils a pass under the First Amendment. I'll read it again. The First Amendment's freedoms of association and expression mean it's perfectly legal for anyone to join a hate group, as long as it's for the purpose of legal activity, and still be a member of law enforcement. Well, you just said it right there. Come on, KKK. Come on, skinheads. Come on, neo-Nazis. We got a job for you in the ADOCS communities, because we need your help killing them, to run them out, to starve them out for gentrification. We want the city back. They can even serve in other positions of public office. But according to the FBI memo, the government can limit employment opportunities of members when their memberships would interfere with their duties. Jones says that's problematic. You're damn straight. If they were to look into my work and I ain't killed nobody and I'm not a hate group, do you think they would hire me? Do you think I could get elected for office? Quote, I cannot imagine that the FBI today could issue a report concerning any kind of threat without people being alarmed and wanting immediate action, he said. But in this case, there seems to be almost an acceptance of it. The thought is, it's just ideology and they have a right to believe this. In response to our inquiry, the FBI said it routinely shares information about potential threats to better enable law enforcement, but does not comment on specific law enforcement bulletins. This is why Chauvin was able to practice on 8 other people executing Mr. Floyd by government sanction. You see why we may get a conviction and no justice? There are, of course, police officers who recognize racial bias and are calling for change. At the same conference where FBI Director James Comey spoke of the uncertainty of policing bias, the head of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, Terrence Cunningham, apologized for what he called historical mistreatment of racial minorities, mainly American descendants of chattel slavery, who used to be the second largest group in the country. Hispanics are now, and pretty soon Asians will outnumber us. They are working on making us fourth-class citizens in the country our ancestors built with their lives, so that we can eat the cost of slavery. And the laws on the books allow them, give them permission to execute us with impunity. While we obviously cannot change the past, it is clear that we must change the future, he said. For our part, the first step is for law enforcement and the IACP to acknowledge and apologize for the actions of the past and the role that our profession has played in society's historical mistreatment of communities of color. And you can roll that up into the reparations for slavery, Jim Crow, and accrued ongoing systemic racism, oppression, and disadvantage in the country our ancestors built with their lives. There should be a cost. This is a black tax on black bodies. From the slave voyage all the way up into today. When it starts to cost them their pensions, cost them their jobs, cost them the insurance they all need to carry, then we no longer have to pay 3 times for them to execute us. We pay taxes for them to become the police. We pay the civil suits, and right now Chauvin's case is being paid by the union. When it starts to cost them for killing us, for executing us, this will stop. But as long as they can pass it on to the taxpayer, where's the incentive? As long as investors and corporations can turn huge profits for shareholders for the private prison industrial complex, where's the end in sight? To re-enslave black men predominantly. These conversations come as the Department of Justice announced it's launching a national database on use of force and deaths in police custody. For many like Jones, it's another step toward accountability, but questions remain on how to tackle bias early on. One way to do that, he said, would involve screening would-be personnel for bias and supremacist ties. Excuse me. Why wouldn't you do this as a part of personnel? I got to comb through 20 pages to make sure I'm in my sound mind just to be denied opportunity. And you don't have a way to screen the very people you put into our communities for bias and supremacist ties, while saying they can be affiliated with hate groups and still be hired on the police force? And this is why these letters of apology just kind of roll off my back like water off a duck. A conviction does not mean justice. We've got to lean in. Back to the text. Something the FBI acknowledged as a threat a decade before viral videos of police killings became nearly a weekly discussion. Chauvin felt so emboldened, he had about 12 cameras on him out there from every angle. This is why he needs to be convicted on all 3 counts with maximum sentences. As the nation continues to examine the role of race in law enforcement, many like Jones question whether scrutiny of the infiltration by white supremacists will move beyond the FBI's acknowledgement a decade ago to specific action in the decades to come. There needs to be more direct enforcement, Jones said. Hold on, let me scroll down. It's one thing to issue a memo. It's one thing to issue a letter of apology, and another to have continued action after it. There was a warning 10 years ago and nothing else since then. And this is how we are at George Floyd 9/29. Let me see what you guys have got to say about it. Oh my God. T-Mars Red, welcome to the live, my love. Amos Jones, Sasha Del Reese 360. T-Mars Red says, this trial isn't on us to eloquate, articulate, debate, break down. It's on white mommy and white daddy to flush out. These people are fighting with their own selves from within. It's their problem. They can undermine their own selves if they want to. That's on them. We good. We just got to get on code. Don't get all worried, and damn sure don't get all grateful or warm and fuzzy inside because they did the bare minimum of basic justice. Well, I hear you, T-Maz Red. Yeah, I absolutely. It's not about warm and fuzzy. I'm actually seeing a crack in the ceiling. It's just a crack. But we do need to recognize and acknowledge that this has become a major problem that's being discussed, that's being watched throughout the nation and the world. I mean, it wasn't until the cameras showed what was happening down in Selma when the civil rights movement was going on. Okay, so I get what you're saying, but I'm ecstatic because I see movement in the right direction to help us to get some reprieve collectively from the madness. In my next segment, I have to remember to talk about how America with 3 Ks has broken away from the International Court of Law. So when Mickey Fickies like Chauvin walk, prayerfully he won't, we can't even take it to the UN. We can't even take it to the world. I had to flesh the story out, so I'm just going to keep it there. But I'm telling you, this is a step in the right direction, akin to when Martin Luther King had the cameras down there and the lynchings that Ida B. Wells 2.0 were reporting on, and all these things culminated to give us civil rights. So we do have to celebrate the small victories that the world is watching now, and that this country is looking more and more like hypocrites that they are. I'm going to share with you in another segment how China got them all the way together when they tried to come for the human rights. Blinken tried to come for China over human rights violations. And China said, get your Black Lives Matter together before you meddle in what we got going on over here. Mind your own damn business. Clean up your own backyard. These are huge steps in other nations pushing back on the U.S. to fix America instead of running around here like you've got this mastered when you're oppressing ADOCS in your country and other Black immigrants. Mostly us, because as I've shown you in the past, Black immigrants live amongst white. There are 2 ways to access whiteness. The government makes you white by pigment, or you can purchase your access to whiteness. And I've shared the data on prior shows, but immigrants, Black immigrants, are beating the brakes off of us. They're in the top 10% of the 3 trillion that we share. They, by and large, share in the 2.3 trillion. The rest of us whose ancestors built the country with our lives, we share less than 700 billion since COVID. So I feel you, fam, but I have to count it all joy, and I have to keep hope alive. I mean, my God, otherwise I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. So it's not just on them to fix themselves. It's on us to sound the alarm and to keep leaning in as ADOCS. It's only changing because we've been putting pressure on it. Now we're at George Floyd 929, and they see us. So I got to count it joy in that instance, okay? Brian says, I hate when people use black on black crime to deflect from systemic racism. Brother, me as well. That's why I call it out. Y'all want to sit up here and act like other groups aren't complicit in this behavior. Any group robbed of resources have behaved in this way. Check the history before the Irish were made white. The Italians were made white. The Jews were made white. The Hispanics now being made white. The Asians who were made white. Apart from poverty, Brian says, which can explain much of the violence in our community, most crimes are committed among one's own race. White on white, Asian on Asian, Hispanic on Hispanic. Well said. Hold on. Brian says, I think the only reason that letter was made condemning Chauvin was to help the department save face. For him to be able to stay on the force with said track record complaints speaks volumes. Absolutely. Woo, I've got a very intellectual audience. My co-hosts are on it. We see straight through it. Thank you, Perfecto Chico, for sharing on all platforms. Remember, family, to like, share, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. When you do that, it ups the algorithm so more of our people can contribute to the conversation and the exchange. Brian says that whole department needs to be federally investigated after, God willing, they get that individual convicted. You're right. He, the defense, tried to blame it on the alcohol. Roll on the floor. Let me stop. Hilarious, Brian. Keep the laughs coming. Brian, yeah, that Zimmerman testimony was a bad look for the defense. It was good for us. Yes, race soldiers find homes in race institutions. Skinheads, KKK affiliates, and law enforcement is what virtually breastfed the Jim Crow era. The more things change, the more they stay the same. DJ Sejuan, welcome to the live, my love. Hate crime and legal activity don't even belong in the same sentence. Rather, hate groups and legal activity. Thank you, EDEC, for joining the live and for encouraging people to like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate all of my mods in here. Teresa Moses Dayton, oh, welcome to the live, my love. Joelle says, I'm so disgusted. I'm speechless. Yes, China said, how dare you? I can't wait to do that segment. DJ Sejuan says, if the police union is paying for his trial, that means they are in on it too, aka the KKK. Dacarius McLaren, thank you so much for joining the live. Okay, family, we're at a minute before the Dear Immigrant segment, so I hope you guys can join me and give some amazing insight. After that show, I'll be over in Clubhouse for the after party. If you guys are still up and want to chat and just share more insight, I can bring you up on the stage and we can talk about it. Thank you so much. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us wherever ADOCS and its allies are. God truly is, because, family, you are the face of God, the voice of God, the body temple of the Spirit of the living God. Until next time, family, or next show, I love you, Black. I love you, strong. Peace, family.